Welcome to day 149. We've got Proverbs chapter 10 through 12 and Romans 10 today. So as we are reading through prophets, it seems like the wisdom that is being directed at us involves helping us make better decisions in our daily lives. As we read each bit of wisdom, consider, do our choices affect the good fortune or the bad fortune in our lives? Do we have to take responsibility for the impact that our decisions have, especially in the times when our decisions might be part of the reason that we are experiencing bad fortune or misfortune in our lives? Now, chapter 11 really looks at the issue of honesty. And are we honest in our dealings? Are we honest in what we say? And it really brings up this question, how does our honesty affect our sense of community? How do our decisions about what we say and do and how truthful they are affect the people around us? Does lying undermine our relationships? I think we all know that lying definitely undermines relationships. But I think sometimes we forget how big an impact honesty has on the complete experience of the whole world. I have heard from people who've lived in other countries that other places have different ideas about honesty and its role. And so, for example, one person I knew gave birth in another country, and she decided to have her tubes tied, her fallopian tubes removed at the same time, because she and her husband had decided they were done growing their family. And when she woke up after her procedure, she'd had a C-section for the child, and then they'd taken care of her tubes while they were in there. She woke up and she had a little jar on the table next to her bed, and she's like, what is this? Because there were just these strange little shriveled things inside it. They're like, well, those are your tubes. And she's like, what do you mean those are my tubes? And they're like, well, we want to prove to you that we actually did what we said we did. And so when we removed your tubes, we put them in a jar so that you know we did this. Now, when I've had procedures done here in the U.S., I am not given the tissue from the procedure to prove that they did it. We have an assumption that our medical staff have done what they said they were going to do. But this just goes to show you the impact of honesty in a community and how different cultural practices might be different if there is a strong culture of honesty or if there is not. So, the Bible overall has a major emphasis on how we live together as a community. It is not actually primarily a book that is an individual guide to personal salvation. That is definitely part of the information in the Bible, but there's far more of the Bible that's talking about what do we do to live together in a healthy community. So one of the questions for us to consider in this chapter is, do we turn to the Bible more for personal salvation and comfort, or do we look for the sections on wisdom that helps us build relationships and community? I think a lot of us really haven't spent a lot of time actually reading through Proverbs. Proverbs is one of those books that some people, while they're doing their personal daily devotions, they have a bookmark in Proverbs and they just read one verse a day, but they just try to get one snippet of wisdom to keep wisdom at the forefront of their mind through their day. Our final chapter for Proverbs today is chapter 12, and it considers the power of words and our choices when we speak. It definitely says don't gossip and be careful when accepting the speech that others are using. Again, speech is part of community. What we say affects and influences others. We need to be speaking with wisdom. Romans 10, Paul is summarizing the gospel message about Jesus here, and it's using some Old Testament texts. It's got references to Moses and Isaiah as you read through here. Paul is continuing to struggle with Israelites' lack of belief in Jesus as the Messiah. This is God's chosen people. God has had a covenant with the Israelites since the time of Abraham, and they have been waiting for God to send a Messiah, a Savior, a special spiritual leader that was going to bring them into a new phase of the development of God's kingdom. But a bunch of them are not believing that Jesus is that Messiah, no matter how much Paul talks to them about it. Paul is seeing a lot of Gentiles there accepting the gospel message about Jesus and warmly receiving Jesus and building new communities of believers all over the Eastern Mediterranean. One of the things that Paul points out here is that knowledge isn't necessarily the most important thing. Knowing about God isn't the same as having faith. Trusting with your heart is really where faith comes in. And so if you trust your heart that with your heart that Jesus is Lord, you are going to be saved, because it needs to go beyond knowledge. It needs to also be trust. It needs to be faith, and there needs to be action as well. So Paul is really calling us to preach Jesus so people hear and believe in faith. Paul and Jesus both call us to go and tell others about Jesus. Now, a lot of us, frankly, feel very uncomfortable about this. Some of us have grown up in Christian traditions that didn't do a lot of evangelism, and we don't like the word evangelism. Some of us have had bad experience with other Christians evangelizing. It felt very pushy. It was very intrusive. It was very judgmental. But that's not what Paul is talking about here. Paul is saying if you trust in Jesus, Jesus is going to let you know when to use your words wisely, as Proverbs was saying, to be able to share about Jesus in a way that will be fruitful for the person listening. But we need to be talking. We need to be sharing our faith in such a way that others can hear about Jesus and come to trust with faith in Jesus in their lives. So the question for today is, who are you talking to about Jesus and what Jesus has done for you? We'll see you next time.